take a look at what role the state board and state board programs have, your relationship to DWR, and instead of trying to find the pieces of programs in a widget way or some legislation, try to redefine your relationship role with locals, because there are good examples on things that we've tried to do and would like to do, but we need the assistance to get there. And I think the other earlier panel talked about that. So I think as a regulatory agency, it would take a culture shift to kind of do that. I think Tim mentioned earlier the governor's, and I'm going to watch this, a subsidiary program or approach on the relationship between the state and locals. But I think also funding is going to be key, and if we focus in on, at least initially, the programs that we have going on, the staffing and the approach we take, and try to shift that, that's going to be a longer term sustainable change than trying to infuse some new dollars, which we do need, but we're going to need some changes in program and delivery. So with that, thank you.
Right. Thank you very, very much. Next, we have Russ Freeman from Westlands Water District.
Good afternoon, board members. My name is Russ Freeman. I work for Westlands Water District. I'm a resource manager at the district. Apologize that I don't have a PowerPoint presentation for you all to refer to, but much of the information I'm going to discuss today is available on our website.
I was impressed with that. You're one of the agencies that reports your groundwater use on your website.
Yes, we do, and I hope to highlight that a little bit today. Is that better? Okay. Maybe I'll try and talk down into it. Sorry. A little bit of background about the district. As you may know, the district was created in 1952, and the purpose for the district's creation was so that it could pursue a water supply contract from the United States, who was at that time contemplating the San Luis unit. Fortunately, that unit was built, and our district was able to begin taking water service from it in 1968. We have a contract with the United States for 1,195,000 acre-feet roughly. That's a nominal supply. It's subject to reductions in years for various reasons, including hydrology and regulatory concerns, and we rarely see that amount anymore. Last time we got 100% supply was in 2006.
Right. And part of that's because you're the most junior, too, right?
That's one way of looking at it, yeah. We a little bit of a description of the district. It's a roughly 600,000 acre district, bounded on the north by Mendota and on the south by Kettleman City, and as to the western boundary, roughly I-5, and the eastern boundary is roughly the Fresno Slough. The farmers in the district are currently farming about 460,000 of those 600,000 acres, and I'll touch on that point a little bit later in my presentation. There's over 60 crops grown in the district, and at this point, the district is about 140,000 acres of permanent crops. On the issues of groundwater, I'm sure aware the district is quite interested. We've adopted an AB 3030 plan to track groundwater usage and report it, and we've had that in place since 1996. The way our growers look at groundwater, they see it as a backup supply to their surface supply. The water quality is not exceptional. It won't support most of the high value crops in the district, so they prefer not to rely on it. In years when we have a good surface water supply, it represents less than 5% of the usage in the district. Unfortunately, in the upcoming year, we expect it to be about 80% of our supply, and recently it has been averaging about 50% through this 3-year drought. Over the years, our basin has experienced periods of overdraft and subsequent recovery. As I mentioned, the district was created for the purpose of bringing in surface water, and prior to that time, the district was consistently overdrafted to the tune of about 700,000 acre-feet annually. Our basin has about a 200,000 acre foot safe yield. So the surface supplies help reverse that for the most part. You'll see in our more recent reports that the water table has dropped somewhat, but it's still on par with where it was in 1987, despite the recent groundwater pumping that we've experienced. At this point, I'd like to touch on a few of the things the district's doing to manage groundwater. Most importantly, as I indicated, we have an AB 3030 plan, and I'd like to touch on some of the elements of that. First and foremost, the measurement of groundwater in the district. We have an annual program to sound the water level of all the wells in the district. That is up to 1,000 wells. And we also, I think we're the only agricultural district at this point that has chosen to meter all groundwater wells. And we do that no less than quarterly. And we do report that as part of our annual groundwater conditions report. It helps us also estimate consistently what the overdraft is, if any. We do report all that information through the CASGIM program the state has adopted. And lastly, I'd mention about this AB 3030 plan is that we catalog all the well completion reports for wells that are built in the district. And actually, we serve DWR in that regard and provide those to them. A couple of the other activities we're involved in. Recently, the Regional Water Quality Control Board issued the district a general order to comply with the long-term irrigated lands regulatory program to address the basin plan objectives and the anti-degradation policy that the regional board and state have. We got that on the 9th, and we are in the process at this point of forming our third-party coalition. We intend to represent all the growers in our district in that regard, and we will be, over the coming year, preparing a groundwater assessment report which will inform our monitoring program going forward and then also help establish best management practices for our growers. Other things I'd point out is that, as the other speakers have mentioned, surface water and groundwater are linked, and it's our view that in our efforts to conserve water, we're interested in conserving groundwater as well as surface water. We have developed water conservation and management plans that are in conformance with both the United States and the state of California's guidelines. And we are also funding annually a conversion to drip irrigation for our growers. And at this point, our growers are about 85% drip irrigation. That's been a huge change over the last 15 years.
Are you, my understanding, are you the most aggressive on water conservation of any district that you know of? I've heard that you're among the most, if not the most.
Well, I think we have the highest rate of drip irrigation among agricultural districts. And that's, as you may imagine, in large part due to the water supply conditions in our district. A couple more things we do to help the groundwater basin, and this goes to the comments you heard earlier on in lieu recharge. We do pursue importation of surface water every year from willing sellers, and the board has been most helpful in getting those transfers approved, and we appreciate that. In 2013, for example, we transferred in about 250,000 acre feet, and that is roughly 25% of our supply for this year. Finally, I'd point out that the district has, in its efforts to manage its water supply, gone about a land acquisition and retirement program. We've purchased about 85,000 acres within our jurisdictional boundary, and those acres are no longer irrigated. That's a groundwater use that is not being tapped anymore. I have a couple of comments on the district's concerns regarding the potential for groundwater regulation. It's been pointed out to the board that among districts we would prefer an approach that focuses on local management. Our board and our growers are keenly interested in managing the groundwater supply within our area, and I believe they have the political will to do so. It's unclear at this point whether a water district has authority to regulate groundwater. There seems to be a negative inference within the code section, and we're trying to evaluate that. And if the state would like, it may be preferable to give explicit authority to water districts to do so. Also, as I pointed out, surface water for us is key to managing our groundwater basin, and where the board has the ability to do so, we would encourage you to support funding for infrastructure that will increase surface water supply reliability, and that would include the BDCP and DHCCP programs. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions the board has.
Thank you very much. We may have questions at the end.
Okay.
Or do you have a question now?
No, real quick. I appreciate everything you mentioned. The work's been done, and just curious about how much investigation you may have done assessing the results on the groundwater levels and quality from the land retirement decisions.
Well, what we've noticed in the areas where we've acquired lands is that the depth to groundwater has been improved, both in terms of shallow groundwater, perched water. You may be aware we have a drainage issue in the district, but also in the deeper aquifers there has been recovery. We haven't attempted at this point to try and make that part of the supply of the district. It's just kind of there to help the overall conditions.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, sure.
So in light of the fact that so much land has been fallowed or retired, and you said that the safe yield is 200,000 acre feet, and typically you like to see, in good times, just 5% reliance on groundwater, but now you're looking at 50 to 80%. Are you able to have that increase without it impacting going beyond the safe yield because of the land retirement program?
Well, it's helping, but we're still seeing overdraft. For example, this year we expect to pump about 600,000 acre feet, so we're going to be about 3 times that safe yield. But that's happened in the past, and when the good times come, if they do, we'll see a recovery, and hopefully we'll be back to the levels we saw at the beginning of this drought.
Great. Thank you. And next, Mr. Danny Merkley, California Farm Bureau Federation of California.
Now I don't need to introduce myself.
Do you recognize yourself in the formal title? Mr. Merkley.
Thank you, Chair Marcus and members of the board. Danny Merkley with the California Farm Bureau. I was glad to hear you at the very beginning comment on some new faces and familiar faces, since I think I'm probably one of the familiar ones. I preferred that you use that term instead of old faces, because mine is getting older. You also asked if we're asking the right questions, and when we looked at the concept paper when it first came out, it was clearly very carefully drafted and very deliberate, very, very considerate. When we saw the 6 questions on the back, it took us back a little bit. We were a little concerned. It seemed like it took a leap to say that we shall do this, this, and this. How would you like to see it done? I'm oversimplifying. So we had a little bit of concern about that. We would suggest that one of the things that can be done to answer some of those questions would be to look at, as you've heard here and others talk about, areas where things have worked. I think there's a lot of benefit from cross-pollination, whether you move deputy directors around within the water board to give them broader experience, or whether you're able to get people, staff and board members out of Sacramento and out into the field, not only to see what's working, but to see what's not working and why it might not be. And we would be happy to help facilitate setting some of those things up, as I'm sure others here would as well. One of the interesting things that came to me while I was sitting here was that, in listening to everybody here and some of the earlier folks, we're hearing from areas that are being very proactive, the ones that are doing a good job. I don't know if you'd be able to attract people that maybe have a problem and aren't able to address it at this time,
Yeah.
but it would be good to hear why that is, because we don't believe anybody overdrafts their groundwater basin on
fun.
purpose.
Right.
They do it, or maybe I should say, they do it because they have no other options other than to fold up the tent, any more than anybody there are a few maybe that overdraft their bank accounts on purpose, but for the most part that do not, but they have no other options. So I would like to recommend setting some things up where not only get you, the board members, out to see some of these things, what's working and what's not, but staff as well, because my experience now in Sacramento has been, you're here today and gone tomorrow. Staff was here yesterday before you got here, and they'll be here long after you're gone. And so it's very important to help them see some of this stuff so that they can do better work behind you to feed up to recommendations and whatnot to you as well.
Well, to the extent people, too, can help us in informal settings and comfortable settings, talk to people who aren't having such a proactive time of it, that would help us a lot, as well as seeing more of what you're doing on the ground that's working.
And as a farmer that got lost in the fog one day going to my field and wound up in Sacramento, I have found the cross-pollination of being in what my dad has always held over our heads as the real world, to come into Sacramento and see how things worked here. I have a much different perspective on not only people, relationships, and how things get done than I did before when I farmed full-time for a living, but it's also helped me to be able to help our membership understand how to best enact change and get things done. My comments are a little more general than I would like them to be able to give you some more specific recommendations, but we represent nearly 78,000 individual and farm family members that grow some 400 commodities in the state. And so, like the groundwater issue in different basins, what works for one doesn't work for the other. And so our comments are a little bit more general as a result of that. We have worked very hard for many years to help farm families be sustainable, and that means using our scarce natural resources, including and especially water, groundwater, surface water, to make sure those things are sustainable, so they're here for the next generation. You know, I'm fourth generation Sacramento Valley farmer. I would like to see my kids be able to do the same thing, or my grandkids be able to do the same thing, because in spite of some of the things that I've heard from time to time from frustrated people, I think it's a very honorable profession, and it's a profession that provides a tremendous amount to this state's economy, not only for the financial contribution, but the fact that we feed so much of the nation and parts of the world as well. Trying to figure out how to keep this interesting without being provocative, since I'm not representing me. And I don't know how to do that, because a lot of these things we're talking about are the same things we talk about constantly every day. Just in the last week and a half, I don't know how many interviews on camera or radio I've given, and it seems like I'm just talking in sound bites all the time, but that's,
You could share some of them with us.
I have on a regular basis, I think. Probably in a bar. But I don't remember. We were very actively, Farm Bureau was very actively involved in the 5-bill comprehensive water package in 2009. And SBX 76 was just one of 5 bills in that package. We've got 3 other bills that are law as well that we are trying to work with the proper agencies to get implemented. It's challenging because we're missing a key component, and that's the 5th bill that we're working on this year to be able to get before the voters this November. It would be our hope. It's very important for a number of things. First and foremost, it's very important to finance the public benefit part of new water projects, water storage. It is the lacking surface water that I would submit to you. I'm oversimplifying, but in very simple terms, it's that lacking surface water supply that is causing our groundwater issues today. It was mentioned earlier this morning, and I think we all know this, that the state and federal water projects were put in because of a recognition of overdraft and those problems. And so we were moving water in excess what was needed from those areas that had it to areas that could benefit from that. And it's key that it is water in excess. We have a water rights system that some don't like, might look different, completely different if we designed it today, but it's one that's been in place. And I would no more want to make drastic changes to that than I would want to tell my parents that because they bought a house a lot cheaper than I did 50 years ago, 40 years ago, for a much less amount, paid their mortgage, did all the things that the rules and the laws told them to do, and then tell them, well, now it's not fair, so we got to go back. You need to refinance your home to help those that weren't part of the process at that time. I don't know if that's a very good analogy, but it's the best I could come up with. Long before that comprehensive water package, we were actively working with our members locally and with our members that are involved in local agencies to manage their groundwater basins. And in many areas, as you've heard and as you know, that's happened, and in some areas it has not. And that, again, is indicative of this problem. It's a checkerboard. It's something that needs to be dealt with locally could be regionally, so that we can impact those things. We believe the state board's role in this would be to help facilitate that, not an overarching. I'm trying to think of a nice way of putting it, and I'm not coming up with it, so I'm going to stop there. But it needs to be more a facilitated way that offers those areas that, for whatever those reasons are that you find, and I think we can all look at those. We all have a good idea of where we have problems and what those problems are. I don't know that we need to do a heck of a lot more monitoring, that we need to do a heck of a lot more research into this stuff, that we can take steps where there are problems and help those areas that have taken steps by leaving them alone and letting them continue to do the good job that they're doing.
There is, I don't want to tread too far into the, I mean, there is a school of thought that just say, we do have the authority in a case of serious overdraft to step in already. And there are some who would say that by beginning even to exercise, and some have said even today, by beginning to exercise the authorities that we already have, we create a dynamic which will help people who are trying in various jurisdictions to be able to get either the political will or the momentum to do their job, if only to keep us away.
Understood. I guess
It's hard to know. You know, you want to be helpful and facilitative. I completely, obviously, that's part of my philosophy. And then there's the other piece, which suggests we should be this scary creature out here to facilitate work. And it's hard to kind of be both at the same time, but we might try to do that.
I think back to a quote before my time, speak softly and carry a big stick. I may get in trouble for saying that, but I would also like to point to another bill that was in that comprehensive water package, and that was XBX 77 that we've been very actively involved in with DWR and others to get implemented, and that's the water conservation one. And I don't want, you know, I'm trying not to bore you with a PowerPoint, so I'm going low tech. I'm trying not to bore you with a bunch of statistics because I'm not real good at keeping them all in my head. But one that sticks with me is that since about 1967, I'm sorry, California farmers have nearly doubled their productivity by volume using virtually the same amount of water. And that comes from a continually adapting to new technologies, new management practices, new science and understanding, and things becoming economically feasible. I know when I was farming full-time, the banker sure as heck wouldn't loan me the money to put in a drip system if it wasn't going to pay for itself in a reasonable amount of time. Those things, just like big screen TVs and everything else, become less expensive over time and become more proficient at doing their job, and those things get implemented. And for that reason, I think we're moving that way. But SBX 77 and our groundwater issues in this state are hitting that perfect storm. They're helping each other, helping defeat each other in many ways. And so those are some things we need to look at more holistically and more completely. Yes, I would agree groundwater and surface water are very much connected, but they're very different too, and they need to be treated differently. Just like my brother, who's an engineer, needed to be treated differently when he was a kid than me, who was just, I don't know what. Didn't apply myself in school like I should have. So combination with the population increase, the environmental needs, and the increase in environmental regulations and statute, but most importantly, the changes in climate, the changes in how we see precipitation come. Less frequently, more violently, in gulps instead of in sips, is again one of the main reasons why we believe new water storage is necessary. Not to increase the pie, but to change the way we manage it. And I'm rambling a little bit, so I'm going to wrap up here quickly. Water quality and water supply. We're a little concerned about maybe some of the lack of distinction between the State Water Board's authority with those, and they're both very important, but they're two, again, it's water, so it's all connected, but they're two very distinct issues, and we'd like to see a little better clarification, understanding that there's some difference between those. And with regard to the water quality part, talking about drinking water solutions and whatnot in one of your questions, I would refer back to, we got a lot of moving parts on that right now. We've got the Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program, we've got the dairy program, that is both very big changes for California's farmers and ranchers and very difficult to swallow. We're working with the regional boards, with you, to try to get those things done in a way that doesn't throw agriculture completely under the bus and takes care of a very important issue as well in the long term. We've been very active in the Governor's Drinking Water Stakeholder Group and also active in CDFA's nitrogen tracking and reporting task force. So when it comes to the water quality stuff, I think we're well down the road, starting enacting that, and would like to see those things have a chance to work before we get too heavily involved and complicated mixing that up with water supply, groundwater. Lastly, I'll say with anti-degradation policy 6816, a number of us are working with you to try to look at that as it relates to groundwater. Maybe looking at a policy document or something to help guide staff and to guide regional boards in that area, instead of opening up that whole big can of worms. It's going to be very uncomfortable and very timely for all of us, and not timely enough to get things done like we need to in that arena if we were to totally revamp that policy for that.
I suspect we'll be having many conversations about it in this room with many of the same people who are in
Not
this
in the
room.
bars.
That's not in the bars.
No.
That's in this room.
Okay, with that, I will end and thank you again.
Thank you. Thanks for your thought, and thank you very much for your time. Are there any questions before we move to the last panel? Go ahead.
Well, I just,
Sorry, starting on the left. I don't mean to slight.
okay, I just feel I need to bring this up while you all are here, and see that a lot of the water agency representatives, hope they're listening, but I know quite a few of them have left, on this issue of the lack of surface supply and the relationship between surface supply and groundwater. I agree with what you're saying, absolutely, and I think that we need to do a better job as we move forward and adopting some policies that might make that situation worse. But at the same time, I think it's important for all of you to, either as individuals or collectively, the agricultural community and the water districts, to be getting the message out that you bear also a responsibility on self-help. So for those of you who are actively managing, that's terrific. For those that aren't, they need to be undertaking some self-help before, making that claim. You're taking our surface water away. And then secondly, on the issue of expansion of permanent crops. I know this is a very touchy issue. It's not an issue that, I think this board would want to jump into. We've got a lot on our plate already. But Paul, as you were talking about a variety of different tools that can be used locally to address, maybe not in any centralized way, but through a water element of general plan, any tools that you can use to start to grapple with this issue, because there's only so much capacity that's out there. And I think all of us, been driving up and down the state saying, at some point, something's got to give here. And so, and at that point where something's got to give, we're looking at one neighbor, pointing the finger at another neighbor because their well's going to go dry. And we don't want it to get to that point. So what can you all do through the strong leadership roles that you have to start to grapple with that issue? Whether it's, moratorium on, additional wells so that you can pull together the information and better assess exactly what that capacity is, or through, general plan elements, et cetera. But just, encouraging you all to engage in some self-help on this issue, because I really think as, we're going to be talking about this issue not just in the context of this plan, but also as we move forward on phase 1 and phase 2 of the Bay Delta Plan and other in-stream flows. I think when you make that argument, and it is, in my opinion, a very valid argument, you have to engage in self-help first, or at the same time. Any comments? Yeah.
Yeah, I'll comment. That's a fair observation, and I'll kind of go back, also tie in what Chair Marcus talked about with the state board's authority going into basins that may be in overdraft and no one's managing it or haven't managed it appropriately. Are conclusion steps to fix a problem, and I'll go back to the foundational elements that Tim talked about for local agencies, and we talked about some of the things we've done, and we've patchwork those things together, but before, whether the state steps in or the local jurisdiction starts utilizing its authorities in different ways, there has to be a strong, consistent set of data analysis and projections, probably through modeling and monitoring, to describe the circumstances we're dealing with, the land use changes, and the implications for the basin that will then inform the local citizenry as to what the choices are to sustain the basin. By and large, I think in most areas, you'll have locals who want to have good stewardship over their resources, their economy, and their communities, but it's going to have to be built on facts, and that's going to have to start at the local level. So it kind of gets back to even what was in the governor's budget about state board. It's okay, there might be some outliers, but the thing we need to back up and do is define what sort of support, foundational support for people who do want to take responsibility or have responsibility over basins for this fundamental cornerstone piece that has to be in place before we decide to take any action, because we'll need it to choose what action to take. And that gets into changing the roles and funding, and we've been driven by haphazard grant programs and other competitive things which won't work in this instance. We're kind of thinking, is there a state-federal model type of thing on block grants, something like that. And there's different examples where delegated authorities down, and the return for that is you'd get a set amount of money to do X, Y, Z, this foundational piece that then will spur the discussion about what choices need to be made. So that's a long...
No, thank you. I mean, that's the kind of level of detail that we want to get to in terms of what's the architecture of... It can be a complex architecture. It can be a scaled-down architecture. But what are those tools and options that we need as a state to, wherever they're located, to make this thing work? And it's a layering of those. I mean, it's going to take collective consciousness, action, and focus, state and local. I'll just speak for state and local rather than federal at this point.
I would just add that the permanent crops, I was recently told that even the annual crops are considered permanent crops because they need to put them in every year to stay in business.
No, I've heard people
But
be
the
quite
more
eloquent
permanent
about
crops, you're looking at 25-year investment or more. The lenders, the growers themselves, anybody that's got anything involved with it should be looking at that to make sure they've got a 25-year or whatever it might be water supply. And I think that comes from education again. People are becoming educated the hard way in many instances, and others do maybe a little more research and decide, maybe I better not do that right now, or I need to balance my 25-year investment with my annual crop so that if it comes to it, I don't have a short up water supply, I can do some water transfers within that same area of use.
Yeah, and each area is different, I understand, but I do think there just needs to be, we need to look at this, and the best place to look at it is locally.
I completely agree. Thank you for asking that or making that recommendation. I just took my holiday over in December, and I happened to be driving up 5, and it was very interesting because there are all the signs saying, pox on the feds, and but right next to the signs were new plantings, and so it was quite interesting. It was kind of undermined the message, if you will. Financing. I do think. I mean, you mentioned block grants. They have to come from somewhere. They may come from the state and the feds. That's certainly an option, and I think it should be part of any mix. But I don't think that's where all the money's going to come from that is needed. And I've seen, you all have done a lot of stuff with your own funding, and so I will be looking for you to make recommendations as to where you think we should be going on the funding issue, because it'll be complex. It'll be as complex as groundwater and surface water, and so we need to get started on that as well. Thank you.
Thank you all very much for your time and for your time in the future. Appreciate you coming. Great. Next, the Environmental Justice Panel. I'm afraid our timing hasn't worked. It's just one. I was hoping like we'd gone long enough that their calls would be over and they could be back.
Well,
Oh, darn. Sorry. I do think, this is not to absolutely minimize the issue. We have spent a lot of time with you all, and some of these are new, so it's not, I apologize for that.
So the good news is this isn't going to take an hour and a half. It may not even take 10 minutes. So good afternoon. My name is Jennifer Clary. I'm the program manager for Clean Water Action, and I'm here representing a whole variety of groups, many of which were here earlier, and some of which are actually preparing for an EJ tour in communities impacted by groundwater contamination and overdraft tomorrow. I don't know who they're doing it for. I just got that message. So, you know, we've done this a million times, and, you know, when I was thinking about recommendations, I actually thought I could just read your own recommendations back to you from last March to the legislature, Water Board recommendations to address nitrate and groundwater, the most critical recommendation, a new funding source. Let me tell you, I was part of the drinking water stakeholder group, very collegial group, and we started talking about a fertilizer fee or a water user fee, and then somehow we lost a lot of our friends. But, I mean, they were still friendly, but we weren't quite so collegial. So using your authority to order parties responsible for nitrate contamination to provide replacement water, it's not clear to me that you guys have actually taken the needed action to make that happen. Central Coast is the only place I'm aware of that's done that yet, that has had a replacement water order. So legislature, state funding agencies, and declaring high-risk areas, I'm sure you're going to do that eventually.
Working on it.
So just to say that you have a lot of good recommendations. And I just want to reiterate a couple things. One is water quality and water quantity are linked, and a really good example of that I found was in CV Salts. They did some groundwater modeling a few years ago, and one of the areas they modeled was the Tulare Lake Basin. And they actually showed a decrease in nitrate loading because, of course, they were looking at total nitrate instead of nitrate concentration. So the overdraft was so great that they were taking more nitrate out of the water than they were putting in, but of course they were putting in less water, so the nitrate levels were still increasing. So I found that very interesting. And I think that the experience of the communities we work with makes it very clear that while regional action is critical and regional cooperation is critical, it won't do the job on its own. You have to have state oversight and state authority, and I would say the Irrigated Lands program is a shining example of how that works, although it's not clear to me that it's going to work yet. At the very least, just having that program overlaid on farmers has created a lot of change and a lot of interest. So we have more funding going into nutrient research over at CDFA. We have farmers working on best practices. We hopefully will have some groundwater assessment reports that are robust. We'll have additional groundwater monitoring. So I think we need to think about what the carrot and the stick is. And I think you guys have a stick, and you need to figure out the best way to wield it and say, okay, if there's no problem, that's great, but you can't tell me, listening to everyone come up here today, it's clear that there's no groundwater problem in California.
I don't think we got people volunteering to come and tell us what they couldn't do. I'm hoping that we'll get more feedback in an informal setting on what they need to do the job.
And I'd also want to put in a couple, let me see, Colin, Human Right to Water. So Colin was going to talk
Oh, yeah,
about...
why don't you just channel? We could try doing it. We've spent so much time together.
I'm just going to do a couple quick things. First, we do want to talk about the human right to water,
Yeah.
because you guys have really paid a lot of attention to it, and we appreciate it. And one thing I would point out, and one of the most interesting presentations today for me, I mean, they were all fascinating, was Miranda Fromm showing you the difference that depth makes. And we've been telling you that for a long time, but it's always nice having a pie chart to say the same thing. And so here you have the communities without safe drinking water, and we also have research that I've referenced in other submittals that people who are in small water systems, these small community water systems with contaminated groundwater, are more likely to be poor communities of color. So there's your environmental justice connection, and that is a suggestion that maybe that's where some of your focus needs to be. And again, it may take decades to change things in groundwater, but remember, the first people to have a problem are going to be the first people who feel the effect of any changes that you make. Moving on to Phoebe, who's going to talk about anti-degradation. I have no lawyers here today, so forgive me if I misspeak. So there's two basic issues on anti-degradation. You've seen pages and pages of our petitions, but the two basic things are you're doing anti-deg analyses that don't really quantify the impact on communities of continued degradation. And that really sucks, because they're the ones who are currently paying for it. Communities and taxpayers are the ones who pay the cost of degradation, and it's not being adequately captured in your anti-deg analysis. So I assume that whatever you do on anti-deg, you're going to be providing some direction to the regional boards on how they should do that analysis, and I'd like that to be included. And the next concern I have is I understand that you're going to amend the anti-deg policy, because that's a policy and it's not part of Port or Cologne, it's not part of statute. So it's obviously something that you can address. But where anti-degradation causes pollution and nuisance, you're violating Port or Cologne. And it's not clear, in fact, it's clear to us that you're not taking action that's going to prevent pollution and nuisance of groundwater, because you continue to allow degradation up to the water quality objective. And it just doesn't make sense that you're going to say, okay, stop, because we've heard from many people that you can't put the brakes on that quickly. So having some kind of buffer zone just seems to make basic common sense to us. So moving on to me, there is a lot, you guys in recent years have really made strides. You're gathering more information. You have CASGIM, you have Gamma, which is awesome, and you're finally starting to get more information in Gamma than just the best water quality in each groundwater basin, which is what public water system data tends to tell you. You also have a couple things that haven't been mentioned, and one is AB 2304, which was a Huffman bill from a couple of years ago that requires water systems, that requires groundwater management entities to report recharge areas of the groundwater basins to local land use planning agencies. And, I don't know that there was a state reporting requirement for that, but maybe that's something we need to add in. And it was supposed to already be happening. So a big issue that I found in my history of working...
Sorry, I'm just looking at one of the
Oh, that's fine.
helpful
I'm pretty
authors
sure I'm
to
not
see.
going to run out of time.
She's going to spank us later, so.
So the AB 2304 idea is, water has to be part of land use planning. And that's what we've been talking about. And it's one of those things that is part of your local coordination that I feel in many cases isn't happening, because all of my experience in working with water agencies is they try to stay far, far away from planning entities. They just want the planning entities to tell them how much water they need, and then they go to work and figure out how to do it. And that's not how the future works. And I think some IRWIMPs are trying to figure out how to address it, but it's not clear to me that that's happening very well. Another bill was Senate Bill 244, which is, I think, was it 2011, I think, or 2012, and that was a WOLC bill that requires LAFCOs, as part of their updated housing element, to identify the infrastructure needs of unincorporated communities and specifically identify fringe or island communities within the sphere of influence of a larger entity. And it seems to me that that's pretty important and can also help some of our communities. And having that kind of information linked with the water board is a very good idea. And the next question I'd like to understand is, I've heard a lot about transparency today, and in a state that makes it illegal to share well completion reports, it's not clear to me that we all have the same understanding of what transparency is. And maybe we could clarify that. Maybe the legislature needs to make some findings in that. And I think the one last quick issue is the IRWIMP. So I'm really happy to hear that there's some successful IRWIMPs, and I'm kind of confused that after $1.5 billion in funding, that these groundwater management agencies still require funding for infrastructure. And I really don't understand why the infrastructure needed for groundwater recharge isn't a priority in their various IRWIMPs. And maybe that's something to think about. You know, I mean, let's not tinker with IRWIMPs again. It's just like pulling teeth. But the fact is that IRWIMPs are not accessible. I mean, if you talk to a group of environmentalists or EJ advocates, IRWIMPs are pretty much not accessible to them. IRWIMPs, in the opinion of most of the groups I talk with, are there for large water agencies. It's their little pot of gold. So it's obviously, if it's not being spent on this infrastructure, there must be other priorities. So it'd be good to understand what that priority is, and maybe something you can do through your, using your little spur is to figure out how to move groundwater management up on that priority list. And I think that's about it for me. I probably should have been a lot more detailed and ordered, but I figure you've all heard it before and you don't need to hear another PowerPoint presentation. I mean, I tried, but I just too many.
No, those were all helpful and different.
Cool.
So that is helpful, and especially given the drinking water transfer and the irrigated lands and the variety of issues we're working on, including trying to figure out how to integrate the human right to water into all that we do. We are going to be spending an awful lot of time together, and we really appreciate the time you're spending.
Thank you.
Thank heavens Clean Water Action exists, in addition to our other colleagues.
Yeah, thank heavens my train runs every hour.
Yeah.
And conciseness is always appreciated.
There was a recommendation that we form a stakeholder group as our greatest spokesperson for stakeholder groups. What's your opinion of that
I
recommendation?
think the key word there is steak. No, I haven't been in a stakeholder meeting.
I did
for
not eat
weeks.
much for lunch. I had a different interpretation. I just want you to know.
No, I haven't been in a stakeholder meeting for weeks, so I'm
Really?
in good. Yeah, the drinking water stakeholder group had a last meeting before the holidays.
All right.
So did the reorg stakeholder group. So I'm feeling a little better now. Thanks.
Thank you. Enjoy your brief respite. Thank you very much. Now we're going to move to public comment, and thank you all for being with us. I actually appreciate the folks saying, and hopefully you found it helpful to be listening to our panels. And I'm taking you in the order in which you've come. A lot of requests for 2 and 3 minutes. That's terrific. First is, forgive me if I mispronounce, Kareem Drisi from the California Association of Realtors. The green light needs to be on.
There we go. Is that better?
Great, thanks.
Good afternoon, Chair Marcus and fellow board members. My name is Kareem Drisi, and I'm here today with the California Association of Realtors. Thank you very much for providing me with the opportunity to speak today and comment on the groundwater work plan concept paper. The California Association of Realtors opposes Action Item 8 in Section 3.2.2, which calls upon the legislature to require property owners